first warning came with the welcome pie. The woman across the street held out a foil tin that smelled like late summer and said with the friendly brightness people use when they are saying something they hope you will take seriously without making them say it twice. Do not go into the yard after dark because he walks there. She did not smile when she said he. She glanced past my shoulder toward the narrow side gate and the strips of grass between fence and foundation, and added, as if clarifying a street cleaning schedule, that the lights should be kept steady and the wind chimes should be kept untangled. I said sure, the way a new person says sure to any local rule that costs nothing. She asked whether the previous owner had left the chalk. I said what chalk. She pointed to the inside of the gatepost where 3 small marks looked like a child's game, 2 short lines and a circle. You move the circle to mark where he is when you hear him, she said, so you remember not to step out. I laughed because she seemed kind and because laughing at kindness is a way to avoid asking what it costs. She did not laugh. She said midnight to 4, usually closer to 3. Turn off the sprinklers by 10. Do not whistle. Do not call out. Drink water before bed. Your mouth will go dry if you listen too long. Welcome to the block. I unpacked with that odd neighborhood instruction stuck behind everything else like a grocery bag that refuses to fold. And every time a box scraped the floor, the sound made me think of a foot on concrete. The house was a single story, with a small bedroom at the back that faced a line of fences and the black seam of an alley the city had abandoned to grass. The yard was not much, just a stretch of lawn cut by stepping stones, and a rectangle of cracked patio and a strange straight path of older concrete that ran along the fence at ankle width like a leftover thought. That strip was too narrow to walk comfortably, yet too deliberate to be a mistake. I followed it in daylight and found it ended at a short run of 3 stone slabs near the gate, a miniature staircase that met nothing. It felt like someone had poured a memory into the ground and the lawn had grown around it, because grass does not argue with poured things. At dusk, the wind picked up and the neighbors' chimes began to count the air. They were not pretty chimes. They sounded like bolts in a jar. Around 9, my motion light flicked on twice without any visible cause, and I told myself moths would be generous this year. Around 11, the chimes went from random to regular, a slow 3-beat pattern that matched nothing in the house. At 13 past midnight, I heard it for the first time. A measured footfall along the fence moving from the back corner toward the gate with the patience of someone who owns the distance and has no one to impress. The steps were not heavy. They were precise. In the quiet between the second and third beats, the small hairs along my arms lifted on their own, as if they had been cued. I stood at the back window and told myself the sound came from the alley. The alley returned the lie by staying silent. The next day, the old man 2 houses down waved me over like a coach short 1 player. He wore a cap with a team that moved away years ago and the face that people get when they own a rule so deeply that being kind is the only way to share it. You heard him, he said. I said, I heard something. He nodded without triumph. He asked me to keep the gate latched from sundown and to leave a cup of water on the back step if the air felt tight. He said it like a tip for grilling in wind. Do not open the door if he knocks. He will not be knocking for you, but he will try your name if he learns it. Do not tell your yard your name. Do not step on the old line. It remembers shoes better than grass does. My head filed that with all the other phrases that sound silly at noon and necessary at 3. He pointed to the chalk marks on my gate and showed me how to rub the circle thin when the night felt still and redraw it in the spot where the steps seemed nearest. It keeps you honest when you are tired, he said. People forget how close he is as soon as he passes. Tired brains lie. On the 3rd night, I made a chart like a person who thinks charts are safety. I sat by the back window with a glass of water and my phone set to silent, and I marked the minutes when the wind chimes went regular and the exact times the steps reached the cracked spot by the far corner, and the moment when they paused just beyond the gate where the concrete triangle meets the dirt. He always paused there. If I had not known the rule about gates, I might have opened it to see whether a loose board made the sound. I watched the motion light sputter like it was trying to join the conversation. Around 3, the steps reached my step for the first time and stopped 3 feet short, like a good guest. The pause had weight. I could not see anyone through the glass because the plants by the path reflected my kitchen in small pieces. The wind chimes went silent, as if the air had been instructed to bow. Then a sound like a dry finger sliding along wood came from the gate, not asking, not testing, registering. The steps returned to the fence line and continued. When the chimes resumed, I exhaled so hard my vision pinged. I slept and dreamed a straight line drawn across a map with a ruler. Mrs. Alvarez at the corner invited me for coffee on Saturday, as if she had scheduled my fear. She had a table on her porch, covered with an oilcloth printed with lemons, and a stack of books about the county before it was a county. She did not ask whether I had questions. She began with names. Before this street had a name, there was a cattle path that cut behind these lots toward the river. Before that, a foot route between 2 trading spots ran the same line because people share the same logic as water. Surveyors bought it with ink and deeds and put fences on it. Where you pour concrete on a path, it does not forget the habit. Something keeps walking, even if the feet change. Her father had worked nights at the mill and walked home along the alley that used to be a right-of-way. He said the night has a man in it who keeps to the line if the line keeps to itself. If you block it, he steps around. If he steps around too often, he learns other routes. Doors are routes when they are open. She looked at my hands, which had gripped the coffee too hard, and told me the rules again slowly. Light steady, not blinking. Do not whistle. Do not speak to him. Do not name yourself in the yard. Do not put anything on the concrete line that forces him into the grass. If he must step off, put it back the next day and apologize to the fence. Offer water when the air is tight. We are not superstitious, she said, which is what people say when they have memorized the cost of ignoring a pattern. The first mistake was small and honest, and I made it because humans cannot resist measuring a story with a ruler. I laid a rake across the old concrete strip by the far corner where grass had thinned and stepped back into the kitchen with the self-betrayal that comes from doing a thing you have already told yourself you will regret. Around 3, the steps came on schedule. They reached the rake and stopped with a sound that was not a foot and not wood. A light contact, like a hand touching the top of a door frame while deciding whether to duck. For 4 calm counts, the night held the same breath as me. Then the steps shifted into my yard by half a shoe width and continued along the inner edge of the patio, within a yard of my back door. I had not understood how much difference a yard is until that moment. I stood so still my knees shook. The motion light flashed once and died as if embarrassed. The steps paused in front of my door and traced the line of the threshold without crossing, and then returned to the strip of concrete as if a polite walker had stepped off a sidewalk to go around a garbage can and now could not deny that the road allowed this new lane. In the morning, there was a small gray print like dust pressed wet against the lower edge of the door frame. It smelled faintly like river water and cold iron. I moved the rake and apologized to the fence in a voice that tried not to sound ridiculous because I have learned that ridiculous is often the price of relief. I asked the old man with the team cap what happens if someone makes him step off too many times. He said softly that he learns us. He begins to expect doors. He gets impatient when nights are short. People hear their names and mansions do not like to stand between a name and a call. He told me about the winter 8 years ago, when a family strung blinking holiday lights along the back fence, and how the flashing made the steps stumble and speed and stumble again, and how by New Year's Eve 3 porches had soft spots from weight that is not weight. The family took the lights down and kept their windows covered until spring. He said it like a man telling me not to stand on a rotten board. I went home and put tape over the light sensor on my back spot to keep it from blinking when moths came, and I took the batteries out of a set of solar path markers the previous owner had left in the shed. I did the water cup on the step when the air felt tight, and sometimes it was empty in the morning and sometimes it was not, and I did not count how often because counting would put me on the far side of a line I could not uncross. At the end of the first month, the pattern changed. The steps began to run a second route closer to the houses, still along the fence but with a new pause by the place where the old concrete strip broke, and a larger slab had been poured to make room for a grill. It was subtle. I would have missed it if the wind chimes had not learned the new timing. The pause came like a second thought, long enough for a person inside to say, "Do not," long enough for a person outside to feel proud about choosing stillness. The circle of chalk on my gatepost moved closer to the back step in the nights that followed, and I stopped sleeping because the circle made my chest tight. On the fourth night of the new route, I heard a knocking that was not knuckles and not wood. It was a knock like someone tapping their shoe against a mailbox post to loosen mud. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats, a longer pause, a final 3 beats. My name followed in a quiet voice that sounded like it was learning to pronounce it by listening to my mail get read in a busy office. I did not answer because the old man had been fierce about that. Hearing a name is not a command. He is not knocking for you. The voice tried my name again, and then tried my last name, and then tried a variation with a syllable wrong, the way people who ask you for money always get a letter off. The knocking subsided. The steps went back to the fence like an apology I was not sure I wanted. The second mistake was bigger and came with a reason that would have convinced a better man than me. The neighbor's daughter left her stuffed rabbit on the stepping stones at dusk, and the family fell asleep before retrieving it. A tired house at the end of a long week. The girl cried herself sick at 11, and the mother called me because I had been friendly, and sometimes you are the person who gets called when a small problem feels big. She texted a picture of the animal sitting 2 stones from the back step like a small gray accusation. I looked at the clock. The steps usually reached my back fence around 1. I told myself I had time. I opened my door and ducked into the night, trying to make my shadow shorter, and the air met my face warm and tight like a towel pressed too hard. The wind chimes went irregular, then steady. The cup on the step was already empty, and I told myself that meant nothing. I stepped on the first stone, and my left foot felt heavier than it should have. I stepped on the second, and the night learned my weight like a hand testing a rope. I bent and grabbed the rabbit and held it against my chest like a foolish hero in a small story, and the first step on the concrete line hit my ear hard enough to ring. He had come early, and I was in his path. I did not turn because I did not want to know how tall he was. I did not run because the old man had not taught me what running means in this rule book. I took one long stride to the step and another into my doorway, and in the corner of my eye I saw a shape stop with a courtesy that belongs to old things, and I made the mistake you make when you claim courtesy as yours. I said, "Who is there?" The words felt like a match head. The shape did not move. The wind chimes went silent again. The voice that had learned my name said it right from the space near the gate, not from the shape near the door. The steps resumed along the fence. The shape did not resume because shapes do not need to move to make their point. I shut the door and held the rabbit tightly enough to crease one ear into a new memory. I did not sleep. In the morning, the girl's mother cried when I handed the rabbit over at the curb, and I cried too because false bravery is heavy. After that night, the steps tasted the patio every third pass. He tested the newer route like a person finding a shortcut, and my house began to learn patience the way tired parents do. He knocked on the 5th night. The knock was softer and closer to human. He did not say my name, and I did not open the door because I had learned something about what an opening costs, even if the door does not swing. The next morning, a thin line of gray dust like groundstone sat along the threshold, as if something had been dragged through space wind could not settle. I swept it into a small pile and carried it to the old concrete strip by the fence and whispered an apology that tasted like city water. That day, the old man told me something he had been slow to admit. Sometimes a person on this block chooses to walk the line at night to keep him from stepping off. It is not glorious, and it is not permanent, and it is work. If the path is honored, he keeps to it. If the path is neglected, he teaches us new pathways, and those pathways are doors. The family 2 houses over had taken 3 months to forgive their back door after they forgot to bring in the recycling bin one windy night. He looked at my feet the way people look at your hands when they are trying to tell you kindly that you will be doing something hard. "You should not go out," he said. "If you do, it should be for the rest of us and not for your curiosity." I tried not to be that person. I really did. I kept the lights steady and poured the water and taped over the sensors, and did the chalk moving like a tired clerk stamping time cards. The path brushed my step on schedule anyway. The voice tried my name once each week as if a polite salesman had been told when he might call back. Each time it got closer to the way my mother says it. I dreamed the alley had a mouth, and when it breathed, my curtains moved. The city put a notice on the chain link where the alley begins that said the right-of-way would be cleared in fall. I wanted to call and ask what they meant by cleared, and whether they had someone walking it at night. One evening, Mrs. Alvarez came to my door and handed me a folded paper with a map that showed lines from 100 years ago when the lots were longer and the surveyors straightened rivers on paper until real rivers shrugged and kept their curves. The old concrete strip in my yard matched one of those lines. She pointed at the storm drain at the end of the block where water disappears when it rains and said, "When it is bad, we walk to the mouth and back and he learns that mouth again. He likes water. He does not like thresholds." She said it like a recipe. I put the paper in a drawer where I keep things that want to become true, and then the weather report promised a week of clear, and I closed the drawer because people overvalue promises made by weather. On the last night of the dry week, a strange stillness took the block. The wind went home early. The chimes hung quiet as if someone had pressed a hand against them and told them to wait. At 2:58, a knocking came that was not a knock, but a patient finger on the thin metal that holds screen to frame. 3. Pause. 3. Long pause. 3. I stood on my side of the door and knew with a weight that had nothing to do with wood and everything to do with math, that if I did not make a choice, he would. I poured the water cup full and set it on the step, because rules feel useful when big decisions loom. I opened the door to the chain, because a chain is a story you tell yourself. The night pressed against the gap like a dog's nose. No figure waited on the patio. He stood at the corner of the step where the old line meets the new slab. I knew that without seeing because the air told me. I said into the dark the phrases Mrs. Alvarez had taught me for calming a path. Keep to your line. We will keep ours. Water runs to the river. Ears belong to doors. I said them slowly like a person reading to a child learning the shape of letters. The steps resumed along the fence. The wind chimes broke their silence and found their jarbolt rhythm. I shut the door and leaned my head against it and felt the wood warmer than my forehead. At 3, I did what I had promised myself I would not do. I laced my shoes and took the chalk from the gate and walked into my yard to walk the line. I began where the old concrete strip enters my lot, and I matched the night's cadence, the way a dance partner lets someone else lead. The air along the fence felt denser, like rain that had not decided to fall. I turned the corner where the back property meets the alley's measure, and for a breath the pressure increased, and then relaxed, as if a large animal had realized we were walking together. At the gate, I placed my hand on the wood and whispered that I would cross, and that he would not. And then I stepped across the short run of slabs down to the sidewalk and walked toward the storm drain. Windows flickered. I knew neighbors stood behind curtains, and I felt strange and proud and ashamed, which is how service feels, even when no one has asked you to serve. He followed at my left shoulder, but always one half step behind, never touching, never rushing, always at the distance first set by someone who taught the path in a century when horses slept where cars do now. At the drain, I set the chalk circle on the metal and poured what remained of the cup into the grate, and the water sounded loud in the quiet, as if the storm drain had grown a throat. I spoke apologies to the straight lines of the survey, and the crooked line of the river, and the bent lines of our days. I breathed in time with the steps until my chest stopped hurting. I walked back and he peeled away at the mouth of the alley like a current finding its main channel. In my yard, the air felt light again. On my step, the empty cup smiled with a ring. It did not fix everything. Some nights he tests my patience and tries the slab for the pleasure of watching me hold still. Some nights the voice tries my name the way a lock tries a wrong key and waits to see if the door will be polite. Once a month I walk to the drain and back when the air feels heavy and the bolts and the chimes begin to sound like a metronome. Sometimes the old man with the cap walks a similar line 2 lots away, and in the corner of my eye I see him nod the way men nod when they are doing a simple job the young forget is sacred. In November, the city did clear the alley and cut the grass and raked the bottle caps into plastic bags that rustled under orange hands. That night the steps did not need my escort. They found the mouth of the alley on their own and ran it with satisfaction, and when they reached my gate, the pause felt less like hunger and more like a person checking a watch. The next morning, a new family moved into the house behind mine, and the father waved from the fence and asked about garbage days and schools, and whether this was the kind of block where people talk. And I heard myself say with the bright, friendly voice I had heard at my door in my first week that we look out for each other, and that there is one rule. Do not go into the yard after dark, because he walks there. I did not smile when I said he. I glanced toward the gate and the old concrete strip, and added with the calm of someone who has moved from superstition to practice, that they should keep the lights steady and the chimes untangled and the gate latched, and to drink water before bed if they listened too long. I showed them the chalk marks on the post and drew the small circle where the steps had paused last night, and the young father nodded without understanding and promised quickly, in the way people promise the church they attended as kids that they would. He will learn. The night teaches better than neighbors can. If you come to visit and stand at my back window, you will think the yard is like any other. A rectangle of unambitious grass with a path poured by someone who had concrete and time. If you wait until the chimes lose their randomness and the air finds its small weight and the chalk circle wants to move itself a finger's width toward the step, you will understand why a rule can hold a block together tighter than any neighborhood watch. People write about monsters as if the point is to defeat them and move away. Sometimes the point is to learn the walking and keep your feet where they belong so no one new has to learn a worse path. I do not whistle after dark. I do not speak my name under the open sky. I leave the cup out when the air tastes like pennies. I count when the steps approach, and I breathe when they pause. And if I ever have a child, I will teach them the route to the drain like a bedtime story, so they think water is older than fear. The line under the grass will remember us, or it will not. He will walk, or he will stop. My job, most nights, is only this. When the clock nears 3 and the world feels thinner, I stay inside and wait for the chimes to tell me that the path has been honored and the doors may keep their sleep. If the steps falter, I put on my shoes and match his pace to the mouth of the alley and back before anyone wakes. And when I return, I set the chalk where the pause felt longest, and I whisper to the fence that we are still keeping the line.